Coming up today, President Park Geun-hye is set for a busy few days, drumming up international support for a tough response to North Korea's recent provocations. She'll meet with the leaders of the United States, China and Japan in Washington. With the start of the official campaigning period less than a day away, South Korea's political parties finalise their tactics and clarify their pledges for the April 13th general election. First, passengers and crew scrambled to safety after a plane was hijacked in Egypt. One man is arrested. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello to our viewers around the world. It's 6 a.m. on Wednesday, March 30th here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this morning, President Park Geun-hye jets off to Washington later today for this year's Nuclear Security Summit. On the sidelines of that summit, the president will meet with other world leaders on the need to maintain pressure on North Korea for its recent nuclear and missile provocations. Our presidential office correspondent, Song Ji-sun, starts us off.
Before the official programs begin at the Nuclear Security Summit on Thursday, President Park Geun-hye will kick off the day by holding one-on-one talks with U.S. President Barack Obama. The two will then be joined by Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe for a trilateral summit, where the leaders will discuss North Korea's nuclear issues. President Park and Prime Minister Abe have also set aside time for bilateral talks. It will be their first face-to-face meeting since the leaders met in Seoul in November last year to iron out the details of a landmark agreement on Japan's wartime sexual slavery issue, which was sealed the following month. Before heading to reception for the Nuclear Security Summit, President Park will speak with her Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. Officials say the two will hold in-depth talks on North Korea. The following day, the South Korean leader will sit down with recently elected Argentinian President Mauricio Macri in Washington. Prior to returning to Seoul, President Park will make a short visit to Mexico for a summit with her Mexican counterpart, Enrique Peña Nieto. She will ask both Latin American leaders for their support in strictly and effectively implementing international sanctions on North Korea.
The president will stress the danger posed by North Korea's nuclear development. She will also urge the international community to work together to ensure Pyongyang's denuclearization.
Given that this is the first multilateral summit since North Korea's fourth nuclear test and a long-range missile launch, President Park will look to gather as much international support as she can to steer North Korea away from its nuclear ambitions. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
So, as we just heard there, the leaders of South Korea, the United States and Japan will hold their first trilateral summit in 2 years this week in Washington. Among other things, they'll discuss cooperation in dealing with North Korea. Connie Kim with this report.
North Korea's nuclear issues will be at the center of trilateral talks between South Korea, the U.S. and Japan on the sidelines of the Nuclear Security Summit in Washington on Thursday. Dealing with Pyongyang's nuclear weapons program has become an imminent issue following the heaviest UN sanctions slapped on the North this month as a result of its nuclear and long-range missile tests. Experts say the trilateral meeting is significant in that it'll be the country's first three-way security summit.
Japan and South Korea doesn't have a formal information sharing agreement. This could be a good, an opportune moment for the two countries to work with the United States to come up with an approach for reaching that agreement.
Cooperation on a bilateral level will also be sought during separate summits between Seoul and Tokyo and Seoul and Beijing. When South Korean President Park Geun-hye and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe sit down for talks, the two are expected to call for full implementation of the so-called Comfort Women Resolution reached in December last year. Tokyo has been denying its forced mobilization of Korean women into wartime sexual slavery, hindering faithful implementation of the landmark deal. There is also a possibility Abe could rehash the issue of removing a Comfort Woman statue located in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul. During her meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, President Park is set to put forth efforts to mend tense Seoul-Beijing ties. Seoul had pushed for China's active role in putting pressure on Pyongyang after its fourth nuclear test, while Beijing emphasized dialogue in resolving tensions on the peninsula. The two countries also remain divided on the issue of a U.S. anti-missile defense system being placed in South Korea. The trilateral and bilateral summits will be closely watched as they could influence relations between the four countries as well as developments on the Korean peninsula. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, the United States has stressed that South Korea will require a U.S. missile defense system for as long as North Korea pushes ahead with its nuclear missile programs. Speaking at the Brookings Institution in Washington on Tuesday, U.S. Undersecretary of State Tony Blinken said the deployment of the so-called THAAD system would put real pressure on North Korea to denuclearize. He also called for China's cooperation on the matter. Blinken said Beijing should use its unique relationship with the North to nudge the regime in the right direction. Otherwise, it'll have to accept that Seoul and Washington need an extra layer of security against Pyongyang's threats. The secretary noted that pressuring North Korea with sanctions will be high on the agenda at this week's trilateral meeting between the US, South Korea and Japan in Washington. Overseas Koreans have already begun casting their ballots for the April 13th general election. Voting began at South Korea's consulate in Auckland, New Zealand at 4 a.m. Korea times, around 2 hours ago. And it's going to continue for 6 days at 198 polling stations in 113 countries around the world. Korea's National Election Commission says nearly 155,000 people, or nearly 8% of some 2 million eligible citizens living abroad, have registered to vote in this year's election. Registered voters are required to carry a valid ID with a photo, such as a passport or a resident registration card, and can vote in any country where the voting booths are available. The Commission is advising overseas voters to refer to its homepage for more information. And millions of Koreans in their home country will head to the polls in exactly 2 weeks' time to cast their vote in the highly anticipated general election. And with the official campaigning period to start on Thursday, Korea's political parties are refining their messages and pledges that they plan to take to the public. Ji Myung-gil has more.
The ruling Saenuri Party held its first campaign committee meeting on Tuesday. The 5 members, including party chair Kim Moo-sung, vowed to focus their campaign message on national security and revitalizing the economy through job creation.
The Saenuri Party must listen to what the people want. The top priority is national security and job creation. Also, our economy cannot recover if our security is threatened.
Stepping up its campaign efforts, the main opposition Minju Party of Korea's interim leader Kim Jong-in headed to Busan, located in the conservative stronghold of Gyeongsang-namdo province. There, he met with candidates to explain the party's message on economic issues. The co-leader of the minor opposition People's Party, An Cheol-soo, vowed to take responsibility if the party fails to win 20 seats in parliament, which would allow the party to form a negotiation bloc.
As the party's leader and the person spearheading the race, I will take full responsibility for the outcome of the election results.
Earlier in the day, the party reprimanded one of its candidates for trying to make a deal with a Minju Party candidate running in the same district. The party reiterated it is against forming alliances with other parties for the election, which would undermine An's goal of transforming Korea into a multi-party system. With the campaign heating up, there's no telling if any of the other candidates will try the same thing. But political analysts note that the unofficial deadline for forging an alliance is April 4th, when the National Election Commission starts printing the ballots for the election. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
Now, battle lines are being drawn in the April 13th election, and a number of key races are currently too close to call, according to polls. And history has shown that it's these races, normally won by the smallest of margins, that determine the outcome of Korea's general elections. Kwon Jung-oh reports.
24 key battlegrounds have been identified across the country that are expected to swing the balance of the upcoming parliamentary elections. In the 2012 elections, the winning margin in these races were less than 3%. Although this time the ruling Saenuri party has an advantage with a split opposition, there are still expected to be many similarly close finishes, as well as several rematches between candidates. The first notable rematch will be in the Seoul district of Seodaemun-bi between the Saenuri's Chung Do-won and the Minju Party's Kim Young-woo, who are going up against each other for the third election running. Last time, Chung beat out Kim by just 625 votes, a difference of about 0.9%. Another battle with less than 1% margin was between the Minju Party's Bang Hong-gun and the Saenuri Party's Kang Dong-woo. Park beat Kang by 854 votes, and they'll be facing off again this year. A normally hotly contested district is Nongwon-bi, where Kwon Young-jin and Woo Won-sik battled it out for alternating wins over 3 elections, with an average vote difference of just 3.2%. Although we won't see the two battles again this year, it is still expected to be a close race with a new Saenuri candidate Hong Bong-sik. In the 2012 elections, the Saenuri party won 152 seats out of 300, a majority but only 2. So every race counts, as the future majority of Korea's National Assembly hangs in the balance. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Now, in some non-election news, Korea's ministries and agencies will face spending cuts of 10% next year. The government plans to restructure its expenditures to focus on job creation and boosting the nation's growth potential. Hwang Jie with the details.
During a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, the Korean government approved a budget guideline for next year that will cut discretionary spending by ministries and agencies by 10%. The savings will be used for projects to create jobs for young people and women and to foster new growth engines. In fact, a new survey requested by the Finance Ministry and conducted by Gallup Korea shows that more than a quarter of 1,000 people surveyed said the jobs sector is the most in need of fiscal spending. The Finance Ministry says, however, that the cut does not mean the government is trimming the budget as a whole. Rather, it's restructuring its spending to boost efficiency. Discretionary spending makes up around 50%, or roughly $175 billion of this year's roughly $330 billion budget. If the items that cannot be cut from discretionary spending, like labor, are subtracted, a cut of around $13 billion is expected in next year's budget. The budget restructuring comes amid lingering economic uncertainties at home and abroad, resulting in sluggish tax revenue, along with a rising demand for social welfare due to the aging population and a low birth rate. Each ministry will have to submit its budget plans by the end of May to the Finance Ministry. The Finance Ministry will then put it all together and conduct a review so it can submit the government's 2017 budget plan to the Parliament in early September. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Now, there are fresh concerns about airport security in Egypt following the hijack of a domestic flight bound from Alexandria to Cairo. The 60 passengers and crew were released unharmed, and the hijacker surrendered to police at Larnaca Airport in Cyprus. He was found to be carrying fake explosives. Now, the hijacker's motives remain unclear at this point, but the president of Cyprus says the incident was not terrorism-related. Officials say they think the man is psychologically unstable. Reports say he initially asked to speak with his Cypriot ex-wife, who police brought to the airport before making a series of incoherent demands. Egypt says it has taken steps to overhaul its lax airport security after a Russian passenger jet was blown up over the Sinai Peninsula last October. Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen has insisted the U.S. central bank will move cautiously when it comes to further rate hikes. Giving a speech in New York on Tuesday local time, Yellen said it was appropriate to adjust the rate policy carefully, a remark consistent with the Fed's previous position revealed in mid-March. She said the risks of premature rate hikes and derailing growth outweigh the hazards of needing to catch up to a stronger than expected economy. The Fed chief called economic reports this year somewhat mixed, noting that strength in the U.S. labour market, consumer spending and housing had offset a sluggish global economy and low oil prices. Well, that's all we have for now on this Wednesday morning here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you as always for tuning in to our newscasts, and we'll be back throughout the day with many more news bulletins. So until then, goodbye.